All right, kids, this is where we left off yesterday. I just wanted to make the comment that these three court cases taken together, Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, and Gibbons versus Ogden, the three of them strengthened the power of the federal government over time, which is one of the things you probably should know. I don't know if the test question will be formatted that way, but it is one of the things you should know. All right, so let's talk about how we get Missouri. We're setting up here a scenario that is going to affect the country for a long time. So in 1819, Missouri gets enough people, as you know, by the Northwest Ordinance. You have to get enough people. They get enough people to ask to become a state. Most Missouri settlers had come from Kentucky and Tennessee, both of which had allowed slavery. In fact, slavery was still legal everywhere in the country, except for a few northeastern states that had outlawed it, and Pennsylvania probably. So a lot of the people from Missouri brought their slaves with them, and they wanted to enter the country as a slave state. Now, before this, there were exactly the same amount of slave and free states. And so people in power wanted to keep that balance of slave and free states. Now, in the House of Representatives, that wasn't the case because, of course, the free states, the ones who... let's back up, okay? It wasn't that it was illegal nationally, but some of the states had said we're not going to have slavery, and some of them, it's not that they outlawed slavery or made it illegal, it's just that there weren't any slaves there because slavery wasn't necessary or needed. So the states that looked down on slavery or didn't have it or where it was illegal, those states outnumbered the slave-holding states in the House of Representatives because their population was greater. In the Senate, where everybody gets 2, there was exactly the same number. So this guy Talmadge, you don't have to know his name. He's never going to be tested as far as I know. He proposed that Missouri get rid of slavery over time in order to gain statehood. Like, in other words, you can't be a state unless you agree to this. Now, this passes through the House of Representatives, but of course the Senate blocks it because in the Senate, the people who are from the slaveholding states are not going to have anything of it. So here's our friend Henry Clay riding to the rescue. He is called the Great Compromiser. I'm joking, not really. I mean, I'm kind of joking, but you do need to know he's called the Great Compromiser. And because he comes up with numerous compromises, which postpone the Civil War, really. In reality, that's what they do. He's, I'm sure to his credit, trying to come up with ways to keep the country together and keep people happy. But in my mind, he's postponing the inevitable. Inevitably, the country is going to fall apart over slavery. And so, you know, Clay's trying to prevent it, but it's not possible in the end. So what Clay proposes in this Missouri Compromise, and you're going to have to know this, it is tested, maybe even on the STAR test. Clay proposes that Maine be carved out of the Northeast and admitted as a free state because the people in Maine had been wanting to be separated from Massachusetts and be its own place. And they'll be free. Of course, they'll be a free state. There's no need for slavery way up there in the north. That's too far north for slavery to be of any value. And then Missouri go ahead and be admitted as a slave state. And that's going to keep the balance between slave and free in the Senate. And that would keep everybody happy. Okay? So that's the Missouri Compromise. And it's important. All right. It also draws a line across the rest of the Louisiana Territory along the southern boundary of Missouri. Please look at the line on the map. You have to know it. This is called the 3630 line. It's the 36-degree, 30-minute line, really, but we call it 3630. Slavery is going to be allowed to spread in the Louisiana Territory, everything south of the line, and illegal, everything north of the line. Eventually, when we add more area, they're going to try to draw that line across the rest of the continent. Let's go to the next slide before I continue on with this. All right, so we have foreign affairs problems with Britain. Okay, Monroe's presidency, we have a treaty signed with Britain. Again, I don't think you'll be tested on this, but you need to know that there are things going on because Monroe is famous for foreign affairs in some ways. And so some of his successes would be one of these things, which would be the Rush-Bagot Treaty, which was signed, which limited the number of armed ships each country is going to have on the Great Lakes. Remember, we had signed a treaty with them once, and so we're going to use them equally. This says we're going to limit the number of military ships we have up there and ships with guns, and sets the northern boundary for the Louisiana Purchase territory where it is. It sets our boundary with Canada, all right? And agree to maintain a border without armed forces. So we're not going to be patrolling. We're not going to be setting up giant walls, okay, with Canada. We're going to trust each other to maintain that border, and it's going to be fine. All right, so John Quincy Adams is the Secretary of State for Monroe. Also negotiate the rights of Americans to settle in Oregon country, and that's going to become important. See Oregon up there in the blue, or purplish blue. It is disputed between several different countries, and some of our people want to move all the way that far west, especially since Lewis and Clark have been out there and they see what's there. And so we want to be able to go settle there, not claim it yet, but we want to go settle and live there. And so Adams negotiates this for Monroe. Now, more importantly, we have problems with Spain. Spain's still in control of the colonies of East and West Florida. Just before the War of 1812, settlers in West Florida had rebelled against Spanish rule and never wanted to let a crisis go to waste, as some of our more prominent politicians would have said just recently. The U.S. government stepped in and claimed that West Florida was actually part of the Louisiana Purchase. Now, it really was not, but we were going to claim it. All right, in 1810 and 1812, the U.S. took control of western Florida. Of course, Spain doesn't like this, but they don't really put up a fight over it. But here's the problem. Native Americans in eastern Florida, think, like the bigger part of Florida, would sometimes come north and raid on the settlements in Georgia and the plantations and whatnot. And Monroe looked around, just as all presidents always do, and said, who can I find to take care of this Native American problem down in Florida? I know, Jackson is just the man for the job. And Jackson took his orders to mean that he should chase the Native Americans back down into Spanish Florida, which he promptly did. And then Jackson decided to go a little further and decided that he couldn't settle the problem really until he took over some of the Spanish forts that were in Spanish Florida. Now, Secretary of State Adams had not authorized that at all, but he didn't punish Jackson either. In fact, Adams and Monroe used this behavior to encourage Spain to sign the Adams-Onís Treaty. Essentially what happened was this. Jackson, they sort of reprimanded Jackson in public. They're like, Jackson, you don't belong taking over Spanish forts. You don't belong chasing Native Americans down into Florida. That's bad, bad, bad. But Jackson sort of told him it's like this. I can take care of this problem, but it's going to keep coming back. He's a military commander. He sees the problem as a military person. This problem is going to keep coming back and haunting you. They're going to keep raiding on our people in Georgia unless you do something about it. And so Monroe goes to the King of Spain and says, look, I had this guy Jackson. He's already taken over some of your forts in Florida. We can do this if we need to. Now, would you like to sign this treaty now with us? Because we need this handled. You cannot handle the Native Americans. You do not stop them from raiding on us. We can stop them. And we can also take over your forts if we have to. So how about signing this with us? Now, Spain does get something out of this. You might not remember from Texas history, but they do get western parts of the Louisiana Purchase that were argued over between them and Spain. So they do get something out of it, but we get Florida, which is good for us. All right, so Spain agrees to cede Florida. The U.S. agrees to turn over contested area between Louisiana Purchase, between Louisiana and Texas. And Spain also gives up any claims to Oregon country, which they're not the only ones that are claiming that land, and they're not really that interested in it anyway. All right. Meanwhile, back in land that actually belonged to Spain, Father Hidalgo issues his famous Grito de Dolores, and that calls for the Mexican Revolution against Spain. He's captured and executed, and the Mexican Revolution is a success. Mexico becomes independent in 1821. The U.S. Revolution, the French Revolution, and the Mexican Revolution started a domino effect of revolution in the Americas. And you don't have to remember all of this, but I think it's interesting. By 1824, Spain had lost Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, Bolivia, Ecuador, Chile, and Peru. Bolivar is known as the liberator by many of the Central and South American countries. The United States, it was the first revolution, but because of it, many other countries, as you see here, all because of ours in 1776. All right, let's talk about the Monroe Doctrine because it's tested every which way to Sunday. Things weren't going well for European empires in North America. In 1822, France, Austria, Russia, and Prussia discussed helping Spain win back its American holdings. Why do they care? Why do they care anything about American holdings? Because they want some too, that's why. They're like, well, if we can help Spain, maybe we can get a toehold as well. This is worrisome to Monroe, but he was even more concerned about Russia because they're starting to say that we own parts of the Pacific Northwest. And since we've got people who have moved out to Oregon, Monroe is like, oh, we don't really want Russia claiming parts of the Pacific Northwest. And so this is concerning to him. And so he issues this statement. The Monroe Doctrine, please, this is so important, issued on December 2nd, 1823, says that the United States will not get involved in affairs or wars in Europe. The U.S. is not going to interfere with any existing European colonies, of which there are almost none left. The Americas are furthermore off limits to more European expansionism. In other words, don't come over here. Just don't. And any attack on one American country, north or south, is going to be viewed as an attack on the United States. So keep out. Now, why would any European country bother to listen to James Monroe when he says keep out? Why? Because we had just won the War of 1812 with the biggest military dog on the planet. That's why. And so it did carry some weight when he said don't do it. So the Monroe Doctrine is very important. Remember it.